Good morning, everybody. I'm Almin from Real IPM, and today we'll talk a bit about knowing your garden pests, but I'll also relate that to using some of the BioGrow products as well as identifying your beneficial insects. So let's get into it. So we'll start with the soft-bodied insects. I like to start with this group because a lot of them fall under the true bugs. So the true bugs have the sap-sucking mouth parts, and most of the damage and signs that you will see related to these insects are very similar, but these insects can also include things like your thrips. As I mentioned, a lot of the soft-bodied insects have sap-sucking mouth parts. That's one way to identify them if you look very closely. But because of this, because they are drinking the plant sap, they are taking in a lot of sugar and they cannot always process all of the sugar. So what they do is they pee it out as honeydew. This is that sticky liquid that we often find close to aphids or mealybugs. So this honeydew can result in a black sooty mold growing on top of the plant. So what happens is where that honeydew splashes on the plant, the sooty mold grows on top of that sugar. So the sooty mold is that black dust that you sometimes find close to aphids or mealybugs. It's not a disease of the plant, so it doesn't infect your plants, but it can cover the surface of the plants in such a way that the plants cannot photosynthesize very well anymore. And of course, it doesn't really look very nice, especially on fruits. You struggle to get off that sooty mold from the fruits. This honeydew also attracts a lot of ants. So as we all know, ants love sugar. So we usually see ant activity close to these types of insects, and I'll talk a bit about that later. Because of this sugar extraction, these insects also extract a lot of energy from the plants. So when there's a big infestation, you can get retarded or deformed growth. The deformed growth can also be because of the saliva of the insect. You know, it's like when a mosquito bites you, they also have stinging mouth parts. Wherever a mosquito bites you, you often get a red bump and it starts to itch. It's the same with these insects, so they can make the plants itch and get bumps and discolor. And also because these mouth parts are like needles, they can also transmit diseases, especially viruses. So if they are feeding on a diseased plant and they go to a new healthy plant, they can carry over that disease and make the problem even worse. Luckily for us, this group of insects have a lot of natural predators around, keeping them in check. So usually when we see an outbreak of these types of insects, we know something is either disrupting the natural predator complex, usually because there's too much chemicals used in the area. And they also give an indication that something is wrong with the plants because they are attracted to plants that are stressed. Plants that have too much water or too much fertilizer is often a problem. So when you have an outbreak of these pests, you need to figure out what else is going on in the system. So aphids are your typical example of a soft-bodied insect. They have those piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they produce a lot of honeydew, causing sooty mold and attracting ants. And they can also spread viruses and cause deformation of your young growth. This is especially because they are attracted to young growth, any young soft growth, like young leaves, young buds, young flowers. We do find them a lot in flowers, as you can see there by the gabbra and the rose. They hide in all the small hiding spaces where you cannot see them. So it's good to take a closer look at your plants, especially if you see honeydew or sooty mold around your plants. They're easy to recognize. They usually have a big round bum with the two spikes at the back. And they do come in all kinds of colors, black ones, brown ones, green ones. You get a lot of them. And something interesting about them is that the females reproduce parthenogenetically. I hope I said that right. It means that the females do not need to reproduce with them. They do not need to mate with a male to be able to reproduce. So that does make it does make their spread a bit worse than we would like. You get winged ones and unwinged ones. This can depend on the time of the season, also on their population. If their population becomes too much on a plant, they tend to grow wings to be able to spread. So these insects are called mealybugs. They can be confused with other insects. Some of your aphids may look a little bit like mealybugs, and some of your other pests as well. They are quite small. As you can see, the photo on the rose gives a bit of a comparison. That's an adult female, so they do not get much bigger than that. So the ones that you see on the right-hand picture are typical females, and then on the left, the top left corner, you'll see an egg sac that is busy hatching. All those yellow spots are the little babies, the crawlers, as we call them. We call them crawlers because the babies are the ones that are crawling around on the plants and searching for a new feeding spot. The females are usually lazy. They sit in one spot and eat the whole day. So typically, like your other soft-bodied insects, they drink the plant sap. They produce a lot of honeydew, and yeah, all the problems associated with that. They usually hide in small spaces, especially in wintertime. They can hide underneath bark or even in the soil, and then in springtime they will travel up to the rest of the plant. This is for interest's sake to show you the mealybug life cycle. The males and the females actually look completely different. So they all start off as eggs naturally, and as these eggs hatch, they hatch as crawlers. We call them crawlers. They're difficult to distinguish between each other when they are still this small. The crawlers will move around the plant, and the females, as they become bigger, you can see the body shape stays the same. They just become bigger and bigger and bigger. But the males, as they become bigger, they actually go through a pupation phase. So they'll spin themselves into a tiny little cocoon, go through pupation, and emerge as a little fly. It looks like a little muggie, which is quite interesting. Here you can see the female life cycle. So she starts off as eggs, in a little egg packet. This we actually use during scouting to see if the egg packets are still fresh, especially after we've done some kind of treatment. We open up the egg packets, and if we see these sort of yellow eggs, sometimes they can be purple or a bit sort of gray, but if you see these eggs, you know they are still fresh and they can hatch. One egg packet is produced by one female, and she can lay hundreds of eggs. There's probably like 300 eggs in there. So even one female can really cause an infestation. And then they hatch as these tiny little crawlers. You see those little crawlers over there, and then end up as the adult females. The males also start off as eggs. They hatch as crawlers, but then those crawlers spin themselves into a tiny little cocoon. You can see the cocoon looks a lot like an egg packet, but it's usually much smaller, and if you open it up, you won't be able to see any eggs. And then the males hatch from this cocoon. You can see the male is a tiny little fly, usually very hard to spot in the field. Oftentimes when we scout, we look for the females and not the males, but we can look out for the males in the traps. So the whiteflies actually work a little bit differently in terms of their life cycle than the mealybug. In this case, it's actually the babies that are sessile, that do not move around. They are very lazy. They just sit in one spot and feed the whole time. So you'll see the baby whiteflies in the top left corner, where they sit and feed on the plant. And they also produce a lot of honeydew, as you can see in the top right corner. All those droplets, they are honeydew produced by the babies. That woolly, waxy hair is produced by the woolly whitefly that we often find in citrus trees, but not all of them make those waxy filaments. The adults, both the adults, the male and the female, have wings, so they are the little flies as we know them, and you'll often see them behind the young leaves. So these ones are attracted to your young leaves. They lay their eggs on the young leaves, as you can see on the bottom right corner. With that waxy circle, that's where the female is busy laying her eggs. So when you check your plants, always remember to check the backs of the leaves. They are easy to recognize when you disturb the plant and you see these tiny little white flakes flying around. Those are the adults that you're seeing. These photos are enlarged, so they look a bit bigger than what they really are. They are really, really tiny. You'll find them at the backs of the leaves there. So the cottony cushion scale is actually an Australian native. We sometimes call it the Australian bug. This is very easy to recognize, though some people will confuse it with your mealybugs because they seem white and fluffy and soft. But as you can see here, you see this gray part on the front. That's actually the female, and this big white fluff at the back is her egg sac. So if you open that up, you'll find these red eggs or red crawlers ready to spread across the plant. So their life cycle is actually very similar to the mealybugs. The females are the ones that we often find on the trees, while the males are tiny little flies. I've never even seen one before in my life. I've only seen the females. And once again, they produce a lot of honeydew, and you can see all the sooty mold growing on the honeydew as well. We say that it's a sporadic pest because it's not like a seasonal pest like we find with thrips or mealybugs that come back every season. We do find that they often are a problem only when there's something else wrong, the plants are stressed, or especially if there's a disruption in the natural predators in the area, because these ones have a very effective natural predator keeping them in check for us. So when we get an outbreak of the cottony cushion scale, we know something else is wrong in the system. So this insect, I think most of us have seen it, even though we might not have recognized it as a type of insect. If you look at the aloes and you see those white patches or the white leaves, those are actually the white aloe scales. So these are tiny little insects. You can see the little insects over here. That's the female with her egg packet, very similar to your cottony cushion scale, but much smaller. So these ones do not really produce a lot of honeydew. You won't really see them with sooty mold or honeydew, but they do still have those piercing sucking mouth parts. Luckily for us, they usually are kept under control by parasitic wasps and lady beetles, but once again, if the system is disrupted, you do find that these can cause an outbreak, or for some other reasons as well. Sometimes the outbreaks become so bad on an aloe that the leaves can wither, so they can cause a lot of stress on the plants as well. Ants are important to us not because of their direct effect on the plants, but because of the indirect effect that they have. And this is because of the relationship that they have with the soft-bodied insects. As I mentioned before, we all know that ants are attracted to sugar. So ants are attracted to the honeydew that the soft-bodied insects produce. Because of this, they've started to form a symbiotic relationship with these insects, and that can cause a few problems for us. So first of all, they rely on these insects, the plant lice, as a source of food for them, as a source of honeydew. And in return, they will actually protect these insects and even spread them around to new plants, which can actually make your infestation worse. As you can see in this video, they tickle the mealybugs with their feelers to make them produce honeydew. Keep an eye on this mealybug here on the bottom left. You'll see an ant there now. You see it tickles the mealybug, and then the mealybug produces a bit of honeydew, and the ant feeds on that. So they don't attack the mealybugs, they only keep them around for the honeydew. And this is extremely important for us, especially on farms, to know that we need to control the ants to be able to control your plant lice. This example is just a nice way to show you how important your ants are in controlling your mealybugs or your other soft-bodied insect pests. So this was in a citrus farm. They released a lot of natural predators for the mealybugs, and it worked very well. So they had a very good mealybug control, except on a few trees. They had a few hotspots where they still had this high infestation of mealybug. So what they did is they put a bait to control the ants. So this bait you put on the stem of the plant. It's not a chemical that you spray on top of the plant. So the mealybug control was not because of a chemical spray. They only put the bait on the stem of the plant, and 2 weeks later, the mealybug was controlled. So this is to show you how big of a role the ants play in natural control. The ants will actually attack anything that attacks their flock of mealybugs. So because there were so many ants present, the natural predators were not able to feed on the mealybugs, and that's why they had this outbreak. So if you can control your ants, you are already halfway to controlling your pests. Caterpillars are your larval stages of your moths and butterflies. So there's no such thing as a winged baby moth or butterfly. The babies are always caterpillars. And most of your caterpillars have chewing mouth parts, and that's usually how they make damage to plants, because most of them are herbivorous. The moths and butterflies can also do a bit of damage to your plants. It depends on the species, but most of the time it's the caterpillars busy feeding on the plants and not your moths or butterflies. So as most of you may know, the life cycle of moths and butterflies start off with eggs. As you can see in this picture over here, they lay their eggs usually on the food source. So if you can find the eggs on your plants, you'll be able to control them much earlier. Then from there, the little babies, the caterpillars, hatch and they start feeding on the plants, whether it be on your flowers, your fruits, or even your leaves. They start feeding, and as they become mature, they get ready to pupate. Some of them will pupate inside the soil, or they spin themselves into a little cocoon, and then from there they will hatch as an adult moth or butterfly. So we'll start off with bollworm. I think this is a very common pest, and they are highly polyphagous, which means that they have a lot of types of plants that they will feed on. They are not very specific to specific plants that they will eat. Once again, they have chewing mouth parts, and these ones we will often find inside flowers, busy feeding on the flowers. You can see the holes in there. If you open up that flower, you will most likely find a little bollworm caterpillar in there. So the adult moths, the moths will lay their eggs close to flowers, so they are attracted to flowers most of the time, but sometimes you'll see the eggs on your leaves as well. With this bollworm, they usually lay their eggs one by one on the plant. You won't see them laying their eggs in groups, so they lay single eggs on the plant, sometimes on the flowers as well, and then the caterpillars will feed on the flowers. Something that I've mentioned here is the frass. Frass is a way that you can identify caterpillar damage, because some of your other pests will also chew holes in your flowers or in your leaves, but it's usually the caterpillars that leave behind frass. So that's basically the droppings of the caterpillars. It usually looks like crumbs or a bit of dirt on your leaves or on your flowers. So what makes bollworm a little bit difficult to identify sometimes is the fact that they come in all kinds of different colors depending on what they eat or where they're from. So you can see here, these are all bollworm. It's not different caterpillars, they are all bollworm. This is a very nice way to show how you can identify them correctly. So usually we take a look at that white stripe that they have on the side, and then also the way they curl up when they get disturbed. Even when they are small, they tend to do that. And then also something interesting that you can look at is the amount of legs that they have. So most of your caterpillars will have the 3 front legs that you can see there, even when they are small. But the bollworm has 5 back legs, or 5 pseudo legs as we call them, because they lose them when they become moths. So you'll see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back legs, where some of your caterpillars only have 3 or 2 pairs of back legs. So that's a few ways to tell whether it's bollworm or not. Semi-loopers. So semi-loopers are also indigenous to South Africa, just like the bollworm, and they're very closely related to the bollworm. And some people may confuse them with your bollworm or your other caterpillars. But the reason why we call them semi-loopers is because of this characteristic looping movement. It always makes me think of those cartoon caterpillars that people draw. And yeah, that's a way you can identify them. They only have 3 pairs of back legs, or the pseudo legs, or pro legs as they call them, and that's the reason why they loop. Some people will also call them the landmeters, or the measuring worms or inchworms, because of that looping action. So you'll see here on the slide, it looks a lot like bollworm when you look at it very quickly, but you can see that typical looping movement. You can also see that stripe on the side. It's not as broad as the bollworm, but it can be confusing. And then, of course, the 3 pairs of back legs instead of 5. These ones will spin themselves into a cocoon with webbing. You'll often see them attached to the leaves of the plants. But you also get a lot of different species. So you can see the adult moths can vary in color. Because we have so many indigenous moths in this group, it's very difficult to distinguish the caterpillars from each other. Usually you can use the moths to determine the species. The lily borers you may recognize as the caterpillars that bore inside your lily plant, inside the leaves. So this can include your agapanthus as well, your clivias, and some of your other bulbous plants. The moths will lay their eggs in groups. That's how you know it's not bollworm. So if you find these groups of eggs at the backs of the leaves in springtime especially, you can just remove them before the caterpillars hatch. Luckily, these are easy to recognize because of their coloration. However, they are difficult to spot sometimes because they are burrowing inside the leaves, especially when they are small. It's very hard to spot them in time to control them. So spider mites. Spider mites are very, very tiny. They're not insects. They are actually part of the arachnids because they have eight pairs of legs. And these ones are very tiny and sometimes difficult to spot. So even though they are very small, they can really become a nasty pest, especially on farms. We do struggle with these sometimes, and they can build up a lot of resistance to some of your chemicals. But because they are so small, you can sometimes miss them on the plants, but what you can look out for is the feeding damage, especially while their population numbers are still a bit small. They are difficult to spot. But what you'll often find is yellow spotting on your leaves. So they often sit at the back of the leaf, busy feeding there, and as they feed, they make these yellow marks on the leaves. So if you do see yellow marks, especially on your older leaves, on the bottom leaves of your plants, they usually start over there. And as their population grows, they move towards the rest of the plant. And sometimes, which is probably the time most people spot them in the garden, is when they congregate at the tops of the plants with all that webbing and everything going on. I saw a post the other day on social media of someone said they just came out of nowhere, but the amount of red spider mites on that plant meant that it's been an infestation for a while already. So when you reach that point, the damage has already been done. They are busy moving to new plants. So they congregate to the tops of the plants, they spin a bit of webbing so that the wind can blow them away to new feeding areas. And that's what you see in those top 2 photos. As you can see in the bottom photos, those are the enlarged pictures of the red spider mite. And you can even see in the bottom left photo the eggs of the spider mite. So if you do have a magnifying glass, it's a good way to spot them and to identify them, and even to identify the eggs, because if you find eggs on your plants, you know there's an infestation coming. So these pests are usually attracted to plants that are struggling. They thrive in hot, dry weather, so we often see them in the dry, still hot autumn time. And then any plants that are stressed or have too much nitrogen in them, and that counts for a lot of your pests. If your plants have too much fertilizer, you will attract pests to those plants. Luckily for us, not all of the insects that you will see in your garden are necessarily pests. A lot of them, in fact, most of your insects in the world are actually not pests. They're not classified as pests. Some of them are really just neutral insects that just go about their day without us noticing them, and others are actually very beneficial to us. They actually help us to control the pests in our gardens. So I've split the beneficial insects that we're going to talk about into two groups. This one group is the parasitoids. So parasitoids are insects that actually infect and eat up their prey from the inside out. So I want to show you here, most of them are types of wasps. You can see the little wasp over there. She stung the aphid to lay her eggs. So she's using her stinger to lay eggs inside the aphids. That egg will hatch and start to feed on the aphid from the inside out. And when they are ready to become adults, they climb out of the aphid. You can see the dead body or the dead mummy of the aphid here, and the parasite climbing out of that body. So we do have a lot of natural parasites that we find in nature, that you'll find in your gardens as well, but they are very hard to spot because they are so small. But what we can look out for, especially if you have a magnifying lens, it really helps to see whether you have parasitism in your garden. You can look out for swollen up aphids. You can see this aphid over here if you look very closely. It looks a little bit swollen up, and also if you look at its body, you can see that sort of shadow at the back. That's a parasite busy feeding on it. The parasites will choose the organs very specifically to keep the insect alive as long as possible and fresh for as long as possible. So they won't immediately die from the parasitism, but they are as good as dead as soon as they are parasitized. You can also look for insect bodies that have hardened and swollen up. You can see these aphids over here. Some people call it the golden aphids. I've had a farmer call me and tell me they have these golden aphids on the farm and they don't know what it is, and is it a new pest? And it turns out it was just the parasitized aphids. These ones over here are the healthy aphids. These are what we call the mummies. It's just the outer shell of the aphid being left behind. And then you can also look at the mummies with the holes inside. You can see this little white fly over here. It's discolored and it has a hole in the outer shell, which means it has been parasitized. Some of your parasites can parasitize your caterpillars. So it may look like the caterpillars laid some eggs sometimes. So once again, as I told you, the caterpillars are the larval stage of the moths and butterflies, which means that they are not adults, which means that they cannot lay eggs. They cannot have babies because they're not adult. So if you see something that looks like eggs around your caterpillars, those are not caterpillar eggs. Those could be the cocoons of the parasitic wasps. So you'll see in this video over here, I've scouted for some leaf rollers in this Gabra farm, and you can see this caterpillar over here is very yellow. Usually they are green, which means that this caterpillar is not feeling very well, and then you see the cocoons next to its body. That means that caterpillar is as good as dead. The parasites have already climbed out of the body and are busy pupating and turning into adults. So that caterpillar really is as good as dead. It won't feed anymore, and it definitely won't survive to become an adult and reproduce. Most of these parasites are also wasps. Sometimes you'll see these wasps walking around on your plants. Those are not pests. They are usually the good guys. Then the second group I want to talk about are the predators. So the predators, unlike the parasites, do not lay their eggs inside the host's body. They actually catch and eat their prey, like a lion would hunt antelope and eat it up. So yeah, some of these are specialist feeders, but most of them are very generalist feeders. So they'll eat anything that they can catch. And unfortunately, that does mean they may catch other beneficials as well. I've seen a praying mantis, for example, eating bees, or I've seen spiders eating wasps, and usually the wasps are some of your good guys. So unfortunately, that does happen. But keeping in mind that most of your pests are very lazy, they walk around very slowly, so they are easier to catch. So most of these predators will go for your pest because they are so much easier to catch. They'll only eat some of your other beneficial insects if they can actually catch them. Many of these will be familiar to you guys. They can include a lot of your beetle species like your ladybugs, your lacewings, even some of your true bugs like your stink bug species. They can be predators, your praying mantids, spiders of course, and even some of your flies and your mites are beneficials as well. So not all of your predators are necessarily predaceous throughout their life cycle. For example, your ladybugs. The babies are predaceous as well as the adults. However, things like your hoverflies and your lacewings are actually pollinators. They feed on pollen and honeydew or nectar when they are adults, but the babies are the predators. So the babies are the ones you need to look out for to see if they are preying on your aphids or on your mealybugs. So if you see the adults around there, even though they're not predaceous, it's a very good sign. It means that they are settling in the area and breeding and reproducing and making a lot more predators in your garden. Even though we are talking about some insecticides today, I want you to consider this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes from The Little Prince. I must endure the presence of a few caterpillars if I wish to become acquainted with the butterflies. So, like I said, caterpillars, for example, are the babies of butterflies and moths. So, if you want butterflies in your garden, you will have to deal with a few caterpillars eating your plants. So, think twice before you try and get rid of all the insects in your garden. And like I said before as well, not all insects are necessarily pests. So if you do use insecticides, make sure that you use it in such a way that you are still protecting the beneficial insects in your garden. I'm going to scan over a few products that we often use from BioGrow. BioGrow's famous slogan is spray today, eat tomorrow, and that's why we like these products. It's natural products and it's not dangerous for us as humans, especially when you use it on your veggies or on your fruits. You can literally spray today, harvest it tomorrow, and it'll be safe. And because these are natural products, some of them are much softer on the environment and on your beneficial insects as well. Bioneem is a natural insecticide that's made by the cold press extraction of neem seed. Neem trees are trees that grow in India, and we use these seeds to make neem oil. Neem oil has a few different modes of action, which means that it has a few different ways that it kills the insects. This can include disrupting their ability to feed, so it messes up the digestive system. It also regulates the insect's growth and messes up their molting process. What this means is insects need to go through a molting process to continue their life cycle. So a tiny little caterpillar needs to be able to molt, to grow bigger and bigger, and to go through pupation and become an adult. Every single stage has a molting process. So if you disrupt that molting process, they're not able to become bigger, they're not able to become adults, and they will actually die as a result. It also has a repellent effect, which is nice. You can repel the insects even before they reach your plants. We do like to use bioneem, especially when we are in a situation where we need something to use preventatively. Of course, we are careful when we spray things preventatively. You want to spray as little as possible, even if it's a natural product. softer product means it's softer on the environment and on humans. It doesn't necessarily mean it's soft on the insects, and especially on your beneficials, you need to be careful just spraying anything even though it's natural. So we do like to use the bioneem a bit more preventatively because we know it has less of an effect on your beneficial insects. This is because the insects need to actually digest the neem oil before it has an effect on them. And your beneficial insects like your bees or even your predatory insects will not necessarily ingest the neem oil because the neem oil will stick on the plants and not necessarily on the prey that they feed on. So this insecticide we use, it's quite a broad insecticide, and we can use it to control various sucking, chewing and biting insects. So it includes stuff like your aphids, your mealybugs and even your caterpillars. Nudizan is a natural horticultural soap that's a bit more specific to your soft-bodied insects. This is because it has these fatty acids that penetrate that waxy covering of the insects, and it disrupts the cell membranes, causing them to leak out and basically dries out the insects. So it's a bit more specific to your soft-bodied insects, meaning you can use it for your things like your mealybugs, your aphids and your thrips, but be careful when you are trying to target other insects. Also, make sure that you are using this as a contact spray, which means that you need to spray the insect itself. You cannot rely on it to kill the insect if the insect is not present, if you haven't sprayed on top of the insect. You need to make contact with that insect, so be careful when you do that. And then, as you can see, it has a very rapid action. Because it dries out the insects, and the insects are so small, they dry out very quickly, and it does decompose into potash, which is important for your plant health, and it makes it safe for when you use it in your veggie garden. Pyrrole is a natural pyrethrin. It's made by an extraction of certain chrysanthemum flowers. This is a good example for me to explain what it really means when we say it's a softer chemical. Even though this is a natural product, it doesn't mean that it's not hard on the pests. So it is a softer chemical in terms of it doesn't have a very long residue, it doesn't have a very long effect on the environment. It's safe for us to use on our veggie gardens, and also you can use it in systems where you have beneficial insects. However, it is hard on insects. So especially for your pyrrole, still be careful. If you want to protect your beneficial insects, do not use this preventatively. We try to only use this when really necessary, and also when we do need to use it, we try to target hot spots. So if you have one plant that has a problem with pests, only try to spray that one plant. You don't need to spray your whole garden if you do not have a problem all over your garden. So the pyrethrin in this formulation disrupts the nervous system and the breathing organs of the insects and can kill them quite quickly. It has a broad range effect, so you can use it on almost all of your insects. We have really good results on your spider mites and your aphids with this one. But please, once again, be careful when using this, especially when you want to protect your beneficial insects. Only spray when they are not active, or only spray on hot spots. And that was BioGrow's insecticide range. Thank you all so much for listening. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact BioGrow or Talborn, and also feel free to visit the BioGrow website to see their range of other products available. Thank you all.